Three, two, one. Hello, and welcome to Let's Talk, a Tulsa World virtual town hall. I'm Wayne Green, editorial pages editor of the Tulsa World. Today's town hall is graciously underwritten by the George Kaiser Family Foundation. Today we're going to be talking about Tulsa's eviction crisis in the wake of the COVID-19 shutdown. Our guests are Eric Hallett, an attorney and coordinator of housing advocacy for Legal Aid Services of Oklahoma, the Reverend Jeff James, Executive Director of Restore Hope Ministries, and Becky Gligo, Housing Policy Director for the City of Tulsa. Welcome to all of you. We'll be working today from questions and comments submitted by our readers, and I want to get to as many of those as possible. But first, I'd like to help the three of you help me paint a landscape of Tulsa's eviction situation. Even before the COVID-19 shutdown, Tulsa had a disproportionately high number of evictions, and a lot of people complained that the way state law is written and the way our court system works, the deck is very much stacked against tenants. What can you tell us about that, Eric Hallett?
Oh my goodness, that's a great question. Tulsa has the 11th highest eviction rate in the nation among large cities, and Oklahoma has a huge eviction rate generally because we do have some really outdated laws that haven't really kept up with national trends. But just as an example, around 40% of households in Tulsa are renters, and that's like 112,000 families. But we have 14,000 evictions filed a year, which represents about 1 in 8 families in Tulsa County facing eviction every year.
So, Becky, I should have asked before, but am I mispronouncing your name? Is it Gligo?
No, you got it right.
Okay, good.
It's rare, so great job.
Becky Gligo is still talking outside the effects of the COVID shutdown. Can you describe how the cost of an eviction mount up on people who are financially unable to pay their rent?
Absolutely. So even going into this, about a third of Tulsans are already considered to be rent burdened, and that means that they're paying more than a third of their take-home pay towards their rent. And so you're already talking about people who are really living on the margin of any personal disaster, childcare issue, car breaks down, and you're going to have trouble keeping up with your financial obligations. And so then what happens with the eviction crisis, and Matthew Desmond did a really good job of kind of laying this out in his book, Eviction. If you haven't read it, it's a must read. You're talking about the cost of taking off work to have to go to court, the cost of oftentimes people have very little turnaround time from when they're evicted to when they are forced to leave. And so they leave items behind. You're talking about just the emotional toll that might take on you or your children and the trauma associated with that. So there are financial costs. There are also personal costs involved with it. And Matthew Desmond's book says it takes the average person about 7 years to financially recover from one eviction. There's also a ton of hidden fees that get kind of pushed in there. And so it's devastating. The cost of eviction is devastating. Beyond just losing your home, it's very hard to bounce back from that.
Jeff James, locally, what resources are available to someone in that situation?
The first thing that I would suggest is to call 211. The great thing about 211 is it is a resource that can connect people to multiple different resources. And so it may not be, as Becky said, there's the housing piece of evictions, but there are so many other things that are related to evictions. And so that call to 211 is a great first step. And we work with 211 really closely. And Restore Hope is our community's primary rent assistance provider. And so Restore Hope will work with 211 to get that help to the family in need. And we'll also connect the families to the other resources that may be available in our community to help. There are also other agencies throughout the county that are working to try to help families in need. And that's why 211 is a great centralized resource for that. The other thing that I would say is that please use the resources that are there at court. And so resources like Legal Aid Services and Still She Rises, other groups that are there at court to help families at no cost to them to help them go through that process. Unfortunately, not enough tenants go to court. Not enough tenants take advantage of the representation that's there at court with groups like Legal Aid Services and Still She Rises. And so Restore Hope is very honored to be part of that program. Last year, we were able to help hundreds of families in need prevent homelessness, but we're only one piece of that. And so the 211 is a great first step.
Tell me a little bit about Restore Hope. You're a nonprofit, faith-based charitable organization. Is that correct?
Absolutely. Restore Hope started in 1978 as a way to respond to the United Methodist Church's way to respond to families in need. And so since that time, we've been helping people with things like helping with food and other things. For the last 25 years, we've been helping prevent homelessness in our community. And so helping renters and landlords, honestly, who are struggling to be able to pay that rent and be able to make whole. And so for 25 years, we've been preventing homelessness, preventing people from becoming evicted, and trying to help those families in need. And we do so at a very high success rate. Actually, last year, 100% of the clients that we helped stayed out of the shelter system or out of homelessness from our outreach efforts as a community. And so when we are able to help somebody, we are effective in helping. The problem is that the problem is so big that one agency can't possibly do this on our own. And so we're really thankful for the other agencies in our community. The way that I describe it is that we've been sandbagging houses from a flood, keeping them from the floodwaters of eviction. But what we really need in our community is a levy. We need a community-wide effort to make that difference.
Okay, so the three of you have done a pretty good job of helping me understand the situation in normal times. But now let's put the COVID crisis on top of that. Thousands of Tulsans lost their jobs, including an awful lot of people who were accustomed to paying their bills and certainly never finding themselves in an eviction situation. But it goes to figure that people who were living from paycheck to paycheck, in many cases, are going to be unable to pay their rent. Eric Hallett, I'm going to ask you, can you describe how the coronavirus situation has made the situation worse?
Well, and I think you really hit the nail on the head there. So many families who have always been financially responsible and able to be self-sufficient are suddenly finding themselves not able to take care of basic needs. And these families didn't learn growing up how to ask for help, or even that help was available. And so, like Jeff said, people just don't go to court, but people also just don't know to ask for help. And so we're seeing more and more people who are just so confused and hurt by this process. And I have a woman that I helped last week, and her situation really highlights this, I think. She, for the first time, went without income for like 6 weeks, and it had a huge devastating toll on her, emotionally, spiritually. And when her unemployment finally came through, she had this money all of a sudden and this back unemployment, and she had this rent that needed to be paid, but she was so afraid to let go of that money because she hadn't had money and she didn't know what she was going to do, because she could pay this month's rent, but what about next month's rent? And that $600 boost that people get on unemployment ends at the end of this month. So it's really having a devastating effect on families, and it takes us as a community working with Jeff and Becky to really bring all the resources together for these families if they would ask for it.
Mm-hmm. So Becky, we're all familiar with the massive federal relief efforts, billions and billions of dollars, and also a very substantial private investment in dealing with the crisis of the COVID shutdown. What additional resources are available to people out there now?
So right now we have the Schusterman Foundation was incredibly generous to make money available to essentially pay off the pending evictions that were not covered by the CARES Act moratorium, with some expectations for both landlords and tenants to prevent future evictions next month. So that's something that Jeff talked about, calling 211. I will emphasize that 211 is the front door for all the programs I'm about to list. But that's been really helpful with us kind of buying some time before that CARES Act moratorium expires. There's also just the regular programs that Jeff and others run, but predominantly Restore Hope, that are funded by federal dollars that get passed through both the city and the county. And there are some income restrictions on that. We're also anticipating being able to announce a larger county effort with the COVID relief fund dollars in the coming weeks. That will be a partnership with the Tulsa Housing Authority and the county, and details on that will be coming out soon. And then the state of Oklahoma has also made some funds available that we're going to essentially set up emergency rental assistance offices. So what I liken this to is if you have a natural disaster and FEMA or the Red Cross comes in and just starts getting supplies into the hands of people who need it the most, we'll be having a version of that for rent relief before the end of August. I will say that even with millions of dollars on the table here, which is incredible, we've never had that kind of rent assistance impact in Tulsa before, we will still fall far short of the anticipated need for the coming eviction crisis. And so it's not just going to be about assistance, it's also going to be about things like moratoriums, landlords being willing to work with their tenants to come up with alternatives to eviction, because we essentially can't outspend this crisis. The Low Income Housing Coalition projects, and this is all projection, right? Because we don't know, we've never experienced anything like this before, that Tulsa County, not the state, just Tulsa County, will need about $12 million a month to be able to keep up with the pending eviction crisis. So we are throwing some money at the problem while we try to figure out some systemic stop gaps so that people aren't large scale displaced.
The 12 million a month, and from memory, the governor dedicated $10 million for the entire state for eviction prevention out of CARES Act funding. Have I got those numbers right?
Yes. Yeah.
Now, you made reference to the CARES Act moratorium, and our listeners may not be completely familiar with that. That prevented evictions for some people for a limited period of time. Help us understand that a little bit better.
Yeah, so part of the CARES Act that Congress passed said that landlords who had federally backed mortgages, so a Fannie Mae or a Freddie Mac mortgage, or who had subsidy for their tenants, so maybe they had tenants who had Section 8 vouchers, were not able to evict really until the end of August. They can at the end of this week, give a 30-day notice that would allow them to evict at the end of August. We've done the math, and that accounts for about 30,000 units in Tulsa that are under that eviction moratorium. It also provides mortgage forbearance. That's why, you have a federally backed mortgage, therefore the federal government has control over it. So these landlords have some relief as well. But that is, unless Congress acts, that will expire at the end of August, and then basically it'll be wide open for eviction going forward.
Okay, Jeff James, let's turn to you from the perspective of your organization. Can you describe how these relief programs work?
Absolutely. Well, and one of the things that Becky noted is that there are new programs that are building and that we're working on, as we speak, to build up this effort, to build up the levy, to help those families in need. And so I want to reiterate to those who are watching and those who are listening that help is coming, and more help is coming, but there is help out there now. And the first step is to call 211. The first step is to call 211 and ask for help. There is also a form that's available through the Community Service Council on their website. We have a link to it from our website as well at help.restorehope.org. And it's a remote process that people can go to. They'll need to upload some needed documents. These are funding from the Tulsa Area United Way and the Tulsa Community Foundation, and it's specifically for COVID-related people who have had a COVID-related loss of income. And so they need to upload some documents to be able to show some of those things. Once they have uploaded those documents, then it comes to us at Restore Hope and other agencies around the community. And then that's where we can step in and help. Once we are able to get that information, once we know that those families are eligible, then we help relatively quickly to get that assistance into the hands of the landlords. Our checks go directly to the landlords, but obviously that helps those tenants in need. And so I'm thankful for the community for stepping up in that effort. Becky mentioned the Schusterman Foundation program. Through both of those programs together, we've helped with about $300,000 in the last couple of months for hundreds of families in need to be able to get that assistance. And so we're really thankful for that. I also want to point out the information on the CARES Act. There are a lot of landlords, a lot of tenants who don't know if their property is covered by the CARES Act, and don't know if I didn't realize that my house, if I had rented out my house, it would have been covered by the CARES Act. And so there is a group in our community has put together a website, tulsacaresact.com, and you can find out if your property is covered by the CARES Act. which is an important step to be able to find that information. And so I encourage all landlords to look at that, all tenants to look at that as well. It's not as complete as we'd like. Some of those things are difficult to parse out, but I'm thankful for that effort that has happened in our community to put that together.
Let me just sort of throw this one out to any of the three of you. Do some of these programs involve mediation and landlords agreeing to take perhaps less than 100% of the money that's due to them?
Well, for the right now, the programs that we have, the funding that we're providing is actually it's more than what the landlords have asked. The Schusterman funding allowed us to pay not only the rent that was owed from the court, but also we were able to cover June rent as well. So that was in the past, obviously, but so we were able to cover some significant amounts of funding. We obviously would hope that landlords would be willing to work with us to manage what they are charging for us to be able to pay. But in often cases, we're able to pay that full amount. That said, there is a program called early settlement mediation that I can't encourage enough. Really, I hope that would be a landlord's first step. Would be to go to mediation, because while it's unclear exactly what those pieces of mediation, the negotiation that would come out of it, 75% of the time, those cases of mediation are beneficial to both parties. And so that's better than $0. It's better than the court process of evictions. And it's a court-approved, independent mediation that really helps both sides. And I know Becky is far more familiar with that than I am.
No, I mean, I think the important thing is for the first time ever, it's free and it can be virtual. So I know we're all worried about health and safety during the pandemic. And so you can have mediation with your landlord and a third-party neutral mediator without ever having to leave your home and go down to court. And that saves everybody time and money. And Jeff's right, it's 75% effective overall. And within that 75%, 94% of the landlord tenant cases are successful. So it's just been an incredible program and really saves everybody a lot of money and headache.
In a mediated situation, what portion of the rent due do landlords typically end up with?
I don't know that we can answer that generally. It really depends on each case. Right now, though, as Jeff pointed out, with the Schusterman money, they're able to get all of it. And so they're not really sacrificing anything except the eviction itself.
Jeff, on the concerning the Schusterman money, in accepting the money, as I recall, the landlords also have to agree not to seek eviction for some period of time. Is that correct?
The landlord and tenant both have to agree to several different things as part of the contract for the Schusterman process. One is that the landlords agree not to file an eviction for anything other than personal harm for 90 days. That said, we were covering 30 of those days. And one of the other processes that's in the contract is that the tenant agrees to abide by the lease agreement. The tenant agrees to try to pay their rent if they can. And then if there is a dispute, whether it's non-payment of rent or something else that happens between a landlord and tenant, then the contract says go to mediation, go to that court-approved, independent, third-party mediator that they can work that out. In no case did we say we want landlords to give up rent for 3 months. In no case did we say that we want tenants to not pay rent for 3 months. We want tenants to abide by their lease agreement. We want landlords to get the resources that they deserve. And if there is a dispute, instead of eviction, instead of that court process, go to mediation, work those things out through that mediation process. We felt that was a safer way because there is that remote option, and it would prevent a lot of other things that happen when an eviction happens. Eviction isn't just a court process that takes place. It also goes on somebody's credit. It prevents them from other things that could happen with them positively in the future. At Restore Hope, our goal is to help families reach vitality and move to a better level of life. If they have an eviction on their record, they can't do things like go buy a home and do some of the other things that we would want for them to do, that we're often able to do if we can prevent that eviction from happening in the first place. And so the goal of the Schusterman contract was not to give tenants a free ride. It was a goal to prevent the court processes from being unsafe, unhealthy, but also to provide this other healthy alternative through the process of mediation.
So, Eric, I'm going to turn to you. We've talked a bit about the CARES Act moratorium, but there's been talk of a which covers some but not all rental property and is about to end. There's been talk of a broader eviction moratorium in the state. At one time, the court system was closed by the pandemic, which created essentially a moratorium, except that once it reopened again, there was a backlog of evictions that started moving through the system. The city council has endorsed a statewide moratorium. I think the Oklahoma City Council has also. Where does that situation stand?
So we did have the courts essentially shut down, especially in Tulsa County, from mid-March to mid-May. But eviction processes in Tulsa started up the 1st of June. There is virtually no chance that the governor or the state legislators are going to shut down the courts. Not all the courts even shut down before, even though the Supreme Court told them to. And that's Oklahoma. So the law didn't apply in some small counties. In Tulsa County, it's not going to shut down. We have seen a lot fewer evictions filed this year as a result of that 2-month span where there are no evictions. And then because of the CARES Act moratorium that is in place through the end of this week and protects tenants through the 3rd or 4th week of August, about August 24th, there'll be a lot of evictions that don't get filed because they can't. Although we saw about 8% of the evictions from March 27th to the beginning of July were in fact filed in violation of the CARES Act. So without a lawyer present to say, hey, this property applies, we need to stop this, those tenants were evicted, and that's unfortunate. They could still contact us and maybe we could correct that for them. But without some type of federal action that continues suspending eviction, I don't see us not having evictions going forward. We anticipate once the moratorium fully lifts in August 24th, seeing thousands of evictions filed and a lot of families facing eviction. Part of me feels that there'll be kind of a natural balance where the court is too overwhelmed to take more, so that'll slow us down a little bit. And at the same time, for responsible multifamily property owners, the fact is having extra empty units doesn't bring them any income. And so, you know, keeping a good tenant that you can work with over time might actually benefit them, especially with more money becoming available, potentially more money coming from the federal government that might help make those parties whole again. So I think, you know, having some restraint among conservative business persons might actually prevail and help them in the end. I hope that kind of stems the tide a little bit. Otherwise, we are all going to be very overwhelmed in September at the courts. The good news is we have attorneys available at no cost, and it is important that you engage with an attorney to make sure that your rights are being upheld. The truth is, we know from a TU study recently that tenants who had representation on average had $800 less in money that they had to pay back. And they stayed in their homes significantly longer and had more time to move. Because as we heard earlier, when you get evicted, you lose everything. And that's because you have 48 hours to move. But if you have somebody there fighting for you, you can get more time to move responsibly. So I don't think we're going to have moratoriums, and so it'll be every person taking advantage of all of the resources available to help their family get through this.
I don't remember the number, and perhaps you do, but that same TU study showed that an enormous portion of the people in eviction court were unrepresented. What portion are we talking about there?
Sadly, and interestingly, in Oklahoma, the small claims process was intended and designed to be used by people without lawyers. But in Tulsa County, more than 90% of landlords are represented by lawyers, which is what's caused some of this high eviction rate in Tulsa. But overwhelmingly, the tenants are not represented because half of them don't even participate in the process. About 8% end up getting representation. We will represent everyone that we possibly can. We have people ready and available to do that, from not only legal aid, but Still She Rises. Tulsa County Bar Association provides volunteers. We are helping everyone who asks for it. But still, we don't have that many people that ask for help. I've stood in the hallway when we were at the old courthouse with a sign that says, and I wear a badge, it says free legal help, prevent eviction. And they just walk right past me, and I'm like, here to help for no cost, you know. Some people just aren't used to asking for help. I mean, Oklahoma's a very self-sufficient, pull yourself up by your bootstraps people, and asking for help is not what people are comfortable doing. And they need to just trust, though, that we have their best interests, and we can help make their family stay safe.
So I want to turn to a question from a reader who described himself as a landlord, and he seems to be representative of several people who've reached out to me yesterday and today. And it's hard not to be very empathetic with their situation. These are people who depend on their livelihood on rental property. And if there were some sort of a moratorium on evictions, there would not be a moratorium on mortgage payments or property taxes or insurance, or just an ordinary cost of being a landlord. He said that in his case, eviction is always the last option for a lot of reasons, including, just practically speaking, it takes a long time, and that's time that he's not getting rent. But he says, Jeff, that he's got tenants who tell him that they're working through Tulsa Cares relief, but that process seems to take a while, and there doesn't seem to be any documentation that he can use to tell whether they're telling the truth or not. What can you offer him?
I'd say the first thing is to tell him thank you for being a good landlord. It's hard to be a good landlord. It's a lot of hard work to be a good landlord. We have some amazing good landlords in our community. Most of the landlords in our community are fantastic. They work well with their tenants. They communicate with their tenants gracefully. Unfortunately, there are some really bad landlords. Most of those are out of state and not kind of detached from the tenants, detached except for the profit motive. And so I want to say thanks for being a good landlord. Thanks for making eviction the last effort instead of the first response. The process was stuck for a while. We can admit that. As a community, there were some struggles. As Becky said earlier, we've never been through this before. And so there are a lot of aspects in our community that we were trying to ramp up pretty quickly to get that process going. But it has dramatically improved recently. I think we got 30 referral cases yesterday from the COVID-19 funding. And so I will say that just to encourage patience as much as possible for that landlord. Once we get involved, once Restore Hope gets involved, they'll know really quickly whether we're able to help or not. We communicate within a couple of days, both with the landlord and the tenant, to let them know that if we're able to help or not. And so if he has not yet heard, that's probably because it has not yet come to Restore Hope. It has not yet come to that end provider. And it may be that that documentation process, that process of getting the appropriate documents together to show the loss of income, it may be that is the place where that struggle and that delay is happening. And so once we do get involved, they'll know really quickly. And then the other thing that I would say is try, if you're still stuck, ask for mediation, ask for that help to go through the early settlement mediation program. That's a great way to find that mutually beneficial help that both parties really could use. And so that's what I would say. I'd say thanks. Be patient, communicate with your tenant. That's always a great thing. I would also encourage tenants, please be communicating with your landlords. It's important to keep that channel of communication open. We want to make sure that tenants and landlords have good experiences, and mediation is a next step.
Eric, I know your job is representing tenants, and so that's got to be your focus. But the same reader asked, if we make the eviction process longer through a moratorium or through a mediation program or through other protections for tenants, that really in many cases just sort of strings out the process and leaves the landlord without the money to pay his bank or his insurance company or the county tax assessor. What can you offer him?
It's tough on landlords as well. And I'm a lifelong Tulsan and a property owner, and I feel their struggles. The good news is that the same protections, the same CARES Act that are protecting tenants, protects 70% of mortgage holders. So anyone that has a federally backed mortgage, which is about 70% of all mortgages, they are entitled to relief as well, in the form of, there was a moratorium on eviction, on foreclosures, but there is also there is relief in the form of forbearance, where for 6 months, if you can show that you have a COVID-related loss in income, you can get forbearance on your loans, meaning that you won't be foreclosed on, you won't be charged late penalties. That money doesn't get forgiven necessarily, but it can be restructured. It can be added to the end of the loan. The payment could be lowered. You could modify the loan. So for up to a year, those mortgage holders, and that's of right now, who apply for those protections through the end of this year, can see their mortgages not enter into a devastating financial place, something where they can sustain for now until we get to a better place where we're all back on track. So those protections are in place for the landlords who have that federally backed mortgage. It's important and essential that they contact their servicer to make sure that they are taking advantage of everything that's available to them, including lower payments, potentially lower interest, and forbearance on those payments.
Mm-hmm. Becky Gligo, I think you've already addressed this, but it probably bears repeating. Do mediation programs between tenants and landlords, do they work? And I might not have prepared you for this question, but if they do work, why are courts just ordering that they take place routinely in eviction cases?
Well, to answer the second part of your question first, I would love that. And we are all enthusiastically encouraging the courts to do so. I think there's a bit of a debate on whether or not they have the authority to do that. But we believe it's well within their range of abilities and would be very successful for the system as a whole, because it also takes a lot of administrative burden off of the judges who are dealing with unprecedented times as well. The mediation programs absolutely do work. And so, like I said earlier, we have, overall, they have a 75% success rate, but for landlords and tenants, they have a 94% success rate. And a lot of that is just, it's like any other kind of counseling. If everybody comes in with an open mind and is willing to have those discussions, and you have a strong mediator who is willing to kind of take them to that place of agreement, you can get there, because it costs landlords money to evict. And so, like the landlord that wrote to you, if truly that landlord is using eviction as a last resort and we can offer them something else, especially if there's funding attached to it, that sounds great to most landlords. I think the biggest thing is the earlier you can access mediation, the better. You do not have to wait for an eviction to be filed. You do not even have to wait until you've missed your rent payment. If you know that's coming up because your unemployment hasn't kicked in and you've gone through your savings and you're wondering what to do next, you can engage with mediation. First thing, just have a regular conversation with your landlord. But if that's not successful, you can engage in mediation and come up with a payment plan or a different pay date. And there's something amazing that happens when two human beings come to the table together without the contentiousness of a hearing in between them. And I think that's why we're seeing it be so successful.
And actually, there's a cautionary tale that would have been a great use of mediation that unfortunately is a case of a really unfortunate situation. And that was, there's one woman who, when we go back in the court records, we found that she had been evicted 67 times since 2011. 67 times by the same landlord since 2011. We actually called her and come to find out she was working, she had a job. Her paycheck came 2 days after her rent was late. And so most of the great landlords in our community would have changed the due date for the rent and just moved that. Unfortunately, she was filed on eviction 67 times and had to pay the fees. And so it is costly for the landlord. Oftentimes those fees are then transferred to the tenant in late fees and filing fees and other things. And so that we estimate that this woman paid about $13,000 in fines and fees over that time that could have been prevented quite easily by a mediator just saying, hey, can we move this rent due date to a time that is after your paycheck comes. The woman didn't want to move. She was happy to stay in that apartment. She wanted to continue living. That was her home. But she just, the paycheck didn't line up. And so that was a clear-cut case, in my opinion, for mediation to solve that problem quite easily instead of taking it through the courts. So think about that 67 times a court clerk had to process paperwork. That's 67 times that a judge had to make a ruling, 67 times that probably the landlord's attorney needed to show up at court. That's 67 times that could have been taken care of quite easily just through mediation, just by changing that due date. And so that's the gift of mediation. As Becky said, it's two human beings coming together to be human beings together instead of just numbers on paper on an income statement or an investment report.
That's a remarkable story. So Jeff, I'm going to give you the final question today. What are the implications of not coming to a workable solution to this problem? Are we facing a second wave of homelessness to follow the pandemic? What are the human and economic potentials of the situation as we see it now?
Yeah, the reality, unfortunately, is that families will become homeless in unbelievable numbers, and numbers that we can't, I don't even want to fathom. That are an already overburdened shelter system that's already trying to figure out how to be great shelters in the middle of a pandemic, to provide distance in the middle of a pandemic will be overburdened and overrun, and then our community will face homelessness. Kids who are already dealing with changes at school will have to deal with homelessness on top of masks and distancing and all of the online aspects as well. Even if we just have more cases, even if it will likely lead to homelessness, but even if we just have more cases, people will get sick because of the numbers of people in the courtroom. Court staff will be put at risk, and there will be long-term economic impacts. Housing is a basic fundamental need, and if you think about that, so you'll have thousands of our neighbors in our community that will have impact on their credit. That will have an impact on the real estate market. That will have an impact on banking. It'll have an impact on so much more. Housing is so fundamental, and rent assistance and having somebody in their home is so fundamental. We can't afford as a community to not solve this problem. We can't afford as a community to not come together to build that levee, to keep our neighbors from being flooded by eviction, to keep our neighbors in need from losing the thing that they most need in the middle of a pandemic, a safe and healthy home. And so we can't afford to not solve this problem. We need to solve this problem. And the reality is it is entirely preventable. This is not something that we don't know is coming. The wave is coming. We can see the wave coming. We have the ability to stop that wave. We just need to work together as a community. We need landlords and tenants to work together. We need the court system to work with the parties at hand. We need all the help that we can bring to keep this from happening. We need that levee. We need to build that wall to keep the flood from coming and affecting not only the people who will be evicted, but really the downstream effects will hurt everybody.
So as we wrap up, I want to give each of you a few moments to add anything else on the issue that you're anxious to say, but didn't fit in the boundaries of the questions I threw at you. So let's start with you, Becky Gligo.
I think Jeff actually summed up a lot of what I would just say. What I know that we have concerns in Tulsa about the rising number of people experiencing homelessness. And if we don't get in front of this, we ain't seen nothing yet. This is something that's going to take every part of our community to come together to find a solution to these pending evictions. And if we don't, it will cost us thousands more per family as a community to rehouse them within our homelessness system of care. And so, you know, this is all about reaching out to the programs that already exist. I cannot encourage mediation enough. And, you know, I also just want to olive branch to the landlords. We know this is hard on you, and we know that you're doing extraordinary things. We hear every day landlords who have gone without a rent payment for a year as they're trying to work with their tenants. So relief is here, but we need you to reach out and be a part of that process.
Final thoughts, Eric Hallett?
So ask for help. A lot of tenants don't want to go to court because, you know, the number one reason is I had a job I had to go to. I couldn't go to work. I had kids I had to take care of, or I couldn't go to court. I have kids, I can't go to court. But I can go to court for you. And I can set up a hearing where you can appear by phone. So you don't have to risk yourself being in that courthouse. You don't have to leave the home where you're caring for your child. And you will have better outcomes because I can help you access these resources, and I can help you negotiate your position. So absolutely ask for help. Ask for help from all of us. Call 211 because we want to make sure that Tulsa doesn't get sucked down a financial hole over COVID-19.
Reverend James, I'm going to give you the opportunity to offer the benediction today.
Well, with all of those dire things that I said earlier, I want to restore hope a little bit at the end. We had a gentleman who was a veteran, college educated, came to us. He lost his job because of a health condition that he couldn't have done anything about. We were able to help keep him from being evicted, keep him from being homeless. And he's still facing the health problem. He's still facing the health crisis, but we hear from him regularly. He wants to give back to the people who are around him. And so what I would say is that the families that are hurting, the families that are in need, they don't want to be in this situation. They don't want to have to ask for help. They don't want to need that help, but help is there. And if we can help, it can make a difference, not only for the people who we're helping, but for the entire community. And so if we come together, if we do what we always do in the middle of a disaster, which is come together and help our neighbors who are struggling. If we think about it in that way, then we can not only stem the tide that's coming, we can come out on the other side as a better and more whole community. There are some systemic changes that we need to make together to make that happen, but we need everybody to come to the table. We need everybody to be a part of it. We need to come together as a community to make the difference, not just for those in need, but for all of us, because those who are in need will help all of us be better.
So I want to thank our guest today, Eric Hallett, an attorney and coordinator for coordinator for housing advocacy for Legal Aid Services of Oklahoma, the Reverend Jeff James, executive director of Restore Hope Ministries, and Becky Gligo, housing policy director for the city of Tulsa. Thank you to our viewers and to our sponsor, the George Kaiser Family Foundation. Please join us for our next Tulsa World Let's Talk virtual town hall next Tuesday, featuring a discussion of the recent Supreme Court McGirt ruling concerning the reservation status of land in eastern Oklahoma. Joining us will be Attorney General Mike Hunter and other experts in Native American sovereignty issues. I'm Wayne Green, editorial pages editor of the Tulsa World. Goodbye for now.